Hello, this is Eric. Today is January the 7th, 2023. And in this class, we will be addressing the issue of the French invasions into the Portuguese colony. Okay, in previous classes, if you watch them, you're going to remember that I mentioned the fact that some European nations, such as England, the Netherlands, and France, tried and actually managed to invade Brazil more than once. So in this specific class, we're going to talk about the French invasions and how they transformed not only the history, but also the territory and culture of Brazil, okay? So let's go here. In this slide, you have a map of Brazil elaborated, drawn up by France at the time. So it is an evidence of how the French knew about the territory and intended to invade it and to profit through these invasions, okay? So what we must understand is that the French invasions in Brazil occurred at some moments in the colonial history, right? And they involved specifically the Rio de Janeiro and the Maranhão territories, okay? So the division, everything started with the division of the lands that happened during the great navigations of the 15th and 16th centuries, right? The fact is that they left out the French kingdom and other nations as well. So when the Treaty of Tordesillas was established, King Francis I even mocked the papal decision, asking for Adam's will to know in which clause he had divided the world between the Spaniards and the Portuguese. So in practice, France began a trade with the indigenous in Portuguese lands. That happened mainly on the Brazilian coast during the 16th and 17th centuries. So these colonization attempts became known as the French invasions, and they occurred in the cities, as I said, in the cities of Rio de Janeiro and in São Luís, in the state of Maranhão, right? So everything happened when in 1555, Nicolas de Villagagnon landed with 2 ships in the Guanabara Bay region, and he began the constitution of what would be called the Antarctic France. This name was adopted because the French thought that they were close to the Antarctic pole. So the colony obtained the support of the Tamoios indigenous, right, who assisted them in the exploration of the Brazil wood. So here we had again a barter episode involving the Brazil wood that was very valuable in Europe, right? So in exchange for Brazil wood, the French would offer the indigenous peoples artifacts, metal tools, and things like that. Another characteristic of the French colonization was the coexistence between French Calvinists, who were the Protestants, and the Catholics in the French barrier, who had to live together in the Guanabara Bay. So initially, this relationship was harmonious, was friendly. However, along the time, some mishaps happened, and that resulted in the weakening of the organization of the Antarctic France. This is very important to say. So the Portuguese reaction was swift. As soon as they realized that there was conflict, a religious conflict weakening the organization of the Antarctic France, they implemented attacks, and in 1560, under the command of the Governor General of the Brazilian colony, Mendes, the Antarctic France was destroyed. Right, so we have here And also, before I show you the picture, the fact is that it didn't end there. Although Mendoza destroyed the Antarctic France in 1560, the Portuguese also did have to face other clashes with other indigenous peoples. So there was a confederation of the Tamoios. The Tamoios were allies of the French, right? And also with the Tamoios, we're going to see other tribes such as Tupinambás, Aimorés, and Termimimós, right? They're going to battle against the Portuguese. Why? Because the Portuguese imprisoned them and enslaved them, right? And there were, on the other hand, tribes that were enemies of these tribes I mentioned. And these tribes, such as the Guaianazes, they were allies of the Portuguese. So the French built this alliance with the Tamoios and these other indigenous peoples that formed the Confederation of the Tamoios, right? And then the conflicts took place in time at the end of the Antarctic France. What I mean to say is that although we had in 1560, as I said, the destruction of the Antarctic France by Mendoza, the conflicts remained. And they were extended until 1567. So then there was a foundation of the city of São Salvador, do Rio de Janeiro, and the construction of the city was one of the consequences of the French invasion on the southern coast of Brazil and the way it extended throughout the years. But eventually, the war ended, right? The Portuguese managed to defeat the Confederation of the Tamoios and the French. So the war was concluded, let's say, in 1567, right? So right after the defeat, the French decided to attack the northeastern coast of Brazil, particularly the region of Maranhão, right? So between 1612 and 1615, we had the construction of a new colony, the Equinoctial France. But before it, let's see here the picture. This is the last Tamoio picture painted by Rodolfo Amadeo, depicting the end of the wars between the indigenous and the Portuguese. But that happened, the end of these wars between the indigenous plus the French against the Portuguese and some tribes, as I mentioned. This conflict ended in 1567, right? Even after the attack, the successful attack by Mendoza in 1560. So in 1567, we have the end of these conflicts involving the tribes that were allies of the French. But the French, as I said, they headed towards the northeastern part of the Brazilian territory. And by this time, the French built in the northeastern area of Brazil a fort. Actually, they founded the city of São Luís, right? And the name was chosen in honor of the French monarch who was canonized. And then we have the construction of a fort called Fort of St. Louis, right? Commanded by Daniel de la Touche. So, again, at the time, we had the Iberian Union, so Portugal. We're going to study that about that in future classes. But basically, for a few years, we had the union of the Portuguese and the Spaniards, right? We're going to be studying more about that in future classes, as I said, but they were united here. So after the second French invasion, the Portuguese and the Spanish, they basically invaded in a joint action this area of Maranhão, and they managed to expel the French from the Brazilian colony again. But if you think that the invasions ended there, I'm sorry to say, but you're wrong. Because after these defeats, the French set out to colonize the territory now known as French Guiana, right? So on the American continent, they also created colonial barriers in the Antilles and North America, the territories where Canada and the USA are today. So we normally know the French by these attacks against the Canadian and the North American territories, but very few people know about the fact that the French attacked the Guyana, now the place that is called French Guiana, and the Antilles. Right? So in addition, the French government encouraged the practice of piracy, as you can see there in this slide, right? Piracy in the Atlantic Ocean. So various ships and commercial points were being plundered in the American colonies. So two of these onslaughts took place again in Rio de Janeiro. So again, Rio de Janeiro is attacked in the 18th century, and specifically in the year of 1710 and 1711. And this time, the Portuguese did not achieve the same success, and they were forced to pay as an indemnity a high amount to have Rio de Janeiro back. So here in the slide, you have a painting of the representing the entry of the French fleet into the port of Rio de Janeiro. Right, so the Portuguese had to pay this indemnity to have Rio de Janeiro back. As a consequence, we have the foundation of the city of San Luis, as I have already mentioned, by the French. And we have, even nowadays, concerning the Brazilian culture and gastronomy, we have many signs of the French contribution to the Brazilian culture and gastronomy. Here, nowadays, you have croissants and you have many other foods named after products and foods originally French that were being made here in Brazil at the time and still nowadays. Okay, so I hope you have enjoyed this class, and see you in our next class.